When you have a worker bee, and just to be clear, I'm not saying that worker bees don't belong in business, but if you have a lean team of, let's say, less than 10, and you're managing everyone, so there's not a buffer or COO between you and the team, you can't afford to have worker bees because it's a double whammy of draining your time and also having to pay them out.
Welcome, Model FAs. David DeSalle here, president of Model FA and your host of the Model FA podcast. Appreciate you tuning in today. Really excited for our guest, Lauren Goldstein, who we have on the show. Before I go through her bio and help set the stage, just a quick shout out and thank you to Tim Power for making the introduction. Tim's a good friend of ours, brought us together. And here we are. So thank you to Tim. Also, with that being said, if anyone listening thinks that either you'd be a good guest or you know someone who would be a good guest, very much open to introduction. So feel free to shoot me an email at david@modelfa if you have anyone or yourself in mind. So with that being said, Lauren Goldstein is the founder and CEO of the award-winning and globally recognized boutique business consulting firm called Golden Key Partnership. Her clients lovingly call her the business doctor, which we'll dive into today, helping business owners diagnose the real root cause of their team and operational challenges to bring the business back to a healthy flow and ultimately retain more revenue. As a trusted advisor to some of the fastest growing businesses over the last 11 years, one of Lauren's greatest assets is helping business owners successfully transition through the gap of business operator to true business owner, from chief everything officer to a powerful and effective CEO and leader. And I see that all the time where advisors, start off as salespeople / advisors, and then all of a sudden realize, oh crap, I actually have a business now. So this is where Lauren helps, is in that discovery and in that transition. Her unique 4D framework helps CEOs reclaim time to ultimately create more freedom within their business so that they can have more impact, success, and still, take vacations and time off worry-free. Bottom line is that she helps business owners avoid burning out and burning down as they're scaling up. Lauren's passionate about the mental health of entrepreneurs, which is incredibly important. I find a lot of my conversations are getting people right between the ears. So I feel you on that. And creating a space for entrepreneurs to have more fun, play, and do good in the community, both in their lives and business with Goldie's Gill. So with that being said, Lauren, appreciate you joining and really excited for this conversation today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to dive in as well.
Love it. So how'd you get started in business? So in your bio, it alluded to, an 11-year time frame that you've been working with folks. But how'd you get started? Like, what was your first job? What kind of brought you into starting your own thing? Help bring us through that journey.
It's a little unorthodox. So in my former life, I actually was going to be a doctor. That was my path. I worked in pediatric neurology and epilepsy research before I realized that insurance companies make doing what's best for patients almost impossible because it's about their bottom line instead of what's best for patients. So essentially when I was about to start my medical school journey and I was working at Children's Hospital in Colorado, we had a little baby come in that we treated. And then the insurance company came back and said, we're not going to pay for her continued treatment. And that was the moment where I said, I want to make a difference. I don't think I can be in this container of bureaucracy where the patient's lives are just, a footnote or something on a spreadsheet. And I was so mad. I just remember having this out of body angry moment because I had no plan B. Full disclosure, I did not go to business school. And so I just was like, I don't know what to do. So I did what a lot of people who have the rug sort of pulled out from underneath them. I dived into every leadership self-help book, hired Tony Robbins, the whole shtick. And then a few mentors and people that I really respected kept saying, the way that your brain solves problems is very unique. You would do well to be a consultant because the way that you see things connect and can get to the root cause of what is actually underneath, which I attribute to working with tiny humans for a lot of years and trying to figure out what was wrong with them when they can't really verbalize all the things. And so I started being a consultant back before that was something cool that people did. And I did a lot of failing forward and figuring out what my niche was and going to conferences and getting my, I'm using air quotes, real life MBA so that I could support business owners, which I think was, even more valuable. And so the way I got started in business was really just doing this for the first few years as a little bit of a side hustle while I figured it out. And when I had more and more clients going, thank you so much for giving me clarity or pulling me out of, being just too close to it, because that's really what I'm great at is like, if you think of it, like you're stuck in traffic behind a big truck and you don't know if the traffic's going to stop an exit a mile, should you get off here? Should you not? And you just can't see because this big truck's in front of you. I get you in a helicopter and help you see exactly what's in front of you, which is a lot of fun. And I think the other big part of my role as consultant for my clients is simplifying, because I am a very, very firm believer, especially after doing this for 11 years, that the more you grow, the more simple your business should get. It should not get more complicated. So yeah, it's a very unorthodox, wobbly place that I started. But, after I'd say the first few years, it really started to click and gel. And I made the full-time transition, 7 or 8 years ago.
Nice. Well, it's always interesting to me, when I was an advisor, I was more of like a, salesperson. I didn't do a ton of, marketing per se, but now, I'll help a lot of advisors, with marketing. And similar to you, it's like, I didn't have that knowledge, previously, but it's amazing the amount of insight and advice that you can receive from books and conferences and podcasts and things like that. And then obviously implement them on your own and, test them out and make sure that they work. And then, ultimately get paid to help people with that. And, it's almost like getting paid to consume the information that they don't want to consume while holding them accountable, along the way. And most folks are, just listening on the audio, but you got a big bookshelf behind you. So there's a lot of knowledge that has been acquired throughout the years, and cool to see how, you can take that knowledge and the topics that you wanted to learn about and actually turn them into a business. Is pretty cool. So when we had our intro call, in your bio, it referenced it as well, where folks refer to you as, quote, the business doctor. And part of that probably has to do with your background initially, but also, you had said about how you look at someone's business as it relates to nervous system, spinal cord, stuff like that. So just help unpack that idea for me. And perhaps, what does it look like when you meet with an advisor or, any business really initially, like through that diagnostic process? And let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, great question. Actually, I had one of my clients, which is a little bit graphic, but he said, you're like an MRI machine where you just scan my business and you find the malignant tumor and then we can cut it out. And I was like, well, okay, then. So really where the business doctor came from is, to your point, what you alluded to about if you think of your business as a body, really what operations and team is the neural network that connects to the spine of your business so that all the systems are moving together in the same way and everything's communicating. And then when it comes to diagnosing, when you think about when you go to the doctor, it's because something's off, but you're not entirely sure what it is. Yes, you go for yearly checkups or, something like that. But a lot of times it's because you have these symptoms and you don't know what the root cause is. And so one of my very favorite things that I do with clients is what I call a diagnostic deep dive, where we take a holistic look at your business and we look at the 3 pillars of people, process, and product. And we, through a series of, questions that I fine-tuned and following the thread that the answers create, we can actually dive all the way into what the root cause of the team and operation challenges that you're seeing that are showing up as different symptoms in your business, whether it's, attrition in your team or, balls being dropped in the air, or there's a drop in profitability or even a lack of sales. There's almost always something at the core that if you fix that core thing, it's going to have a huge ripple effect versus what I see a lot of practice owners doing is they're duct taping the symptom. And so that'd be kind of like taking and putting a Band-Aid over a gaping wound or taking a Tylenol for an amputated arm. Like it might make it feel better for a second, but it's not actually going to fix the larger issue.
So kind of want to build on some of the points that we talked about initially on our intro call. And then I kind of want to round it out with, I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but like a pseudo live like case study, if you will.
Ooh, okay.
So I think that would be kind of a good way to make sense of all this. So there's another phrase that you said where I just really liked. I was able to picture immediately what you meant when you said it. And you said sometimes advisors will have folks on their team and sometimes they're considered worker bees. Sometimes they're considered players. So help me unpack that a little bit for the folks listening in, and we'll go from there.
Yes. So this concept, when you understand this concept, it is single-handedly the most impactful thing that I go through with my clients because it unlocks businesses in much different ways. So player versus a worker bee. A lot of times what happens, especially when advisors, business owners, they're ready to step into having a team. The mistake that I see is they hire people that either they're like, I just need to clone myself. And so they hire people that are just like them. And then it's kind of the blind leading the blind. Or the second is they say, I just need people to take this off my plate. And so then they're hiring people that are essentially taking tasks and completing them. And so when you understand the difference between a player and a worker bee, you have the amazing thing of leverage and time coming back to you. So a player is somebody who has a plan. They're very big picture. They think in terms of the collective company. How can we move forward? And they don't need a lot of direction because they're actually experts in what you hire them to do. And so if you tell them, in our terms, we use the definition of done, or the vision of the certain project that they're doing. So let's say, I don't know, I'll use Katie as an example. We said we wanted to grow revenue X percentage, through marketing and sales. I'm not a marketing and sales person, so I wasn't going to tell her how to do that. She actually had a plan and said, okay, if we want to do this, then we reverse engineer to this, this, and this. And then, she gets my buy-in if we're buying ads or something like that. But essentially, players come to you with solutions, not just problems. Whereas worker bees tend to be the biggest time sucks for advisors, practice owners, business owners, because you're having to do their job and your job, not in terms of the tasks that they're doing, but in terms of if they don't have tasks, I'm using air quotes, to do, they actually don't have the strategic mind to think outside of that little task list that you've given them. So you're having to constantly think of things for them to do instead of them anticipating what you need. That's one of the biggest complaints I hear is, why can't they just anticipate what I need? Or why can't they just, take the ball and run with it? The answer is because they're just not made like that. And worker bee is very much about, this is my list of things that I need to do. And when that thing is done, then I'm just going to wait for the next list. And I'll never forget, I came into a wealth management practice who was having some pretty serious team problems and trust was at an all-time low. And I came in as interim COO. So I did team interviews because I always like to diagnose first. That's one of the things that really makes me different. But when I come in as an interim COO, I like to also get a pulse of what is actually happening in the team versus what the owner has told me. Anyway, I asked this particular employee who they were really struggling with. I said, when you finish the task that so-and-so has given you, tell me what you do next. And she, bless her heart, was absolutely honest with me. And she said, well, if I don't have any things left, then I'll go play on Facebook, or I'll go maybe work on this project I've been doing outside of work. And it was such a good aha moment, because the reason why in this particular case, the business owner and this employee were really butting heads, beside the fact that she was not innately made for this position. That's something that we really talk about in terms of capability as one of our C's, but she just did not have the mental formulation to be somebody who's moving the business forward. Mm-hmm. She was just somebody that's butt was in the seat, checking off task lists, and she was trading time for money. Whereas players are really looking for, how are we making a bigger impact? How are we creating revenue? Whether that revenue is actual front-end revenue, or if it's revenue preservation, or if it's revenue in terms of giving time back to the business owner.
So there's a lot there. I find that in working with advisors, oftentimes their staff members actually create more headaches than they get rid of. And the advisor is tasked with, of course, assigning tasks, but training them at the beginning. And they hope that they get to a point to where they do the things and they come prepared with ideas, and they end up not doing it. So a staff person may think that they're really busy, but they're finding that they're in between moments, and the time that they do have free, they're not using it strategically enough to really have an impact on the business. And it coincides well with the scenario and the picture I'm going to paint for you here in a moment to try and unpack. But it also seems as if you're essentially, as an entrepreneur style advisor, you're not looking for staff members, you're looking for entrepreneurial people that can act like you in a certain degree within their area of expertise, not take on the risk of running the entire business, but have that strategic mindset. So my question then becomes, I would assume that those players cost more than a worker bee. So I'd be curious to know if you have any insight on, hey, typically you're going to spend 10% more, 20% more, or I may be, misconstruing that and that's not the case. So that would be a question. And my next question would be, when you identify a worker bee in a business, do they need to be replaced, or is there some opportunity to save them, so to speak? Like, how do you actually fix the problem once you identify that, hey, you got some worker bees?
Great question. So that's actually, I would say, probably the number one myth with players versus worker bees, that they're going to cost more. So they might, in an hourly or salary rate, I'm using air quotes, look like they cost more. But when you have a worker bee, and just to be clear, I'm not saying that worker bees don't belong in business, but if you have a lean team of, let's say, less than 10, and you're managing everyone, so there's not a buffer or COO between you and the team, you can't afford to have worker bees, because it's a double whammy of draining your time and also having to pay them out. So when it comes to players and really understanding how much they cost, I have a lot of clients, like I'll go back to my same client where we found out her employee was playing around on Facebook. We actually determined that both of her worker bees needed to go, because even though they had different titles, they had overlapping responsibilities and neither one was actually being very successful in it. In that particular case, the trust was too far gone, that there was some resentment in the team and it was just better to start fresh. But we actually found a part-time player to bring into their practice. I think it was $150,000 we saved in top line revenue by getting rid of the two people and bringing in one part-time person. So when you think of how much a player might cost, what I encourage and what I always talk through with my clients is players are so much more efficient and they almost always bring in money. So they're an investment versus a cost in a worker bee. So like Katie, for example, who's on my team, she came from big consulting firms, big marketing firms, has won awards with Google. She works for us part-time because she's, fractional, right? But it doesn't mean we get less of her. She's just more efficient with her time. So it's a win-win, because we get this world-class expertise for a fraction of the time and money that it would cost if she was full-time, CMO with us. And so it comes down to really getting very, very clear on who you need on your team and the gaps, because if you have that absolute clarity of the mission of the position, how it fits in, and the accountabilities, you can actually spend a heck of a lot less and get a whole lot more with a player than you ever could from a worker bee. And then the thing that I always like to add a little asterisk here, you have to remember that, I'm probably going to misquote this, but I think the average cost of a mishire is $13,400. So by hiring a worker bee that's maybe not the best fit or not actually going to move your business forward and is sucking your time, it's not only going to cost you time in finding somebody else in your day-to-day and all of that, versus taking your time and finding a player that's really going to be your partner and move your business forward.
So it seems like they may not cost more. It's more of an investment. And in some instances, those folks need to be replaced if they can't be saved.
Yeah. If you have great worker bees who you trust, who do good work, that you feel are an integral part of the team, they can absolutely stay, with the caveat that somebody beside you needs to manage them. If you're an entrepreneur, you can't have worker bee. Well, you can, but my suggestion is you don't have worker bees that are reporting directly to you. You need that buffer of a person who can take what you need and run with it, or anticipate what you need and run with it, and then execute with the right people and who needs to do it.
Okay, so worker bees still have a place, but they shouldn't have a place necessarily directly with you. Having at least a player on the team to help coordinate all the worker bees, so to speak, is sort of a better scenario.
Yeah. So a great role that we can steal from Washington is a chief of staff. One of the biggest mistakes I see with advisors, practitioners, is hiring a virtual assistant. And it tends to be a worker bee because, again, they just want things, quote unquote, taken off their plate.
Right.
And so when you see a business owner that's just absolutely killing it and has the freedom and flexibility and has that, quote unquote, right hand man or woman, that's because they found a player versus the person that's like, oh, my assistant, like, why can't they read my mind or anticipate what I need or just do what I need them to do? That's because you've inadvertently hired a worker bee that is not able to actually see how the puzzle pieces move together and think outside the box.
Makes sense. Let me help paint a picture. And this may be a player worker bee scenario, or it may be something else. Like, as you mentioned before, you look at the people, the product, and the process. And I'm not necessarily expecting answers because there's only going to be so much information that A, I'm able to share, and B, that I know enough to share because we don't have this person here with us.
Yeah.
But I'm going to help paint a picture. What I'd like for you to do is share what sort of questions to be asking ourselves if we find ourselves in this type of scenario. And at the end of the day, you probably have a gut feeling too, as it relates to like, you probably got to do this or you probably got to do that. So I think speaking through a case study will help everyone. This one's kind of fresh in my mind. So I have this client that has about 340 households, 192 million in AUM, a seasoned advisor, and has this other advisor that he knows about who has 600 households compared to his 340 and 450 million in AUM as opposed to his 192. So obviously a bigger business. And the key difference to note is that the larger advisor primarily does asset management only, as opposed to like full in-depth financial planning. So an example would be the larger advisor would never ask about the estate planning or their property and casualty insurance coverage like a smaller advisor between the two would. So difference in service model from the beginning. Now, where the frustration comes into play is my client with 192 million has a pretty decent sized team for that type of business, has a junior advisor, an executive assistant, and 2 service associates. This larger advisor has 1 junior and 1 service person. So basically 2 less, people. And the larger advisors never stressed out. Essentially what they do is they don't even really do a ton of reviews. They just do like 100 calls a month between the senior advisor and the junior advisor, just checking in with clients. So as you can see that, each client essentially gets a quarterly call if you do out that math. And where my client's frustrated is he finds himself answering emails for 3.5 hours after dinner, 2 or 3 times a week, working on the weekends, and just finds that he's much more bogged down than he feels like he should. So I want to be careful of, comparing apples to oranges, because obviously there's different service models in there. But at the end of the day, someone with that much revenue as an advisor, talking about my client, and that big of a team, personally, like I'd be pretty pissed if I was up all night answering, emails and doing things like that. So we talked about doing a better job, like delegating and things like that. But obviously feel free to ask follow-up questions because I'm doing my best with trying to paint a picture. But what are some questions that either I can help with or questions that advisor should be asking themselves? And then what's your gut tell you?
Oh, so many things come to mind. Okay. So in terms of one of my first questions would be, where does he find himself continually answering the same question over and over and over again? Or like, is there a theme with these emails or with his day-to-day? Because my gut says they're different service offerings, but when I have a business owner that's getting really, really burned out, even when they have a team, so, they're like, I have a great team, but so much is still falling on me. I want to know, like, are they having a hard time giving up control? Is that it? Where they feel like nobody can do it like them? Or is it a situation where their operations just have not been set up and they're doing a lot of manual work that could be cut out with like a Google Drive folder for all the clients where they have all their stuff and they just, move the stuff around and send it. And like, that's their little portal. Or is it a matter of the team is not clear on what they're expected to do? So they're asking a lot of questions and drawing out the time from the business owner? Or is it, just that he isn't sure how to get out of the trenches because he's been in the trenches for so long. So it's comfortable and he's more comfortable doing the things than being the leader. Like that gap could be there. So, some of the questions I have is, what is the trend with these emails? Like nobody should be doing 3 hours of emails after dinner. That sounds terrible. 2, in our diagnostic, we would actually look at their team. One of the ways that we do that is we have a tool we use called Wealth Dynamics that allows us to figure out what their unique CEO profile is. And then we type the team because there's a very simple formula that we use with this test to show you who you need to have on your team to complement your weaknesses. Because we all have weaknesses, and it's the matter of who on your team do you have that's going to make your strengths better and also make up for your weaknesses. And so I would want to dig into the team because it could be that he has worker bees. It could be that the roles are not really clear or the end goal of like where the practice is going is clear. Because if the end goal of the practice isn't clear, then you're just playing whack-a-mole, right? And you're like, I hope this makes a difference and I hope this gets us closer to the goal. Because sometimes when I'm helping the practitioner transition to business owner, it's kind of funny because, I'll ask, well, does your team know what your goals are? They'll be like, oh, no, I haven't actually shared that with the team. So the team's kind of just operating in the dark and you're trying to get them somewhere, but they don't actually know what the destination is. So I have many questions around, what are these things that he's doing? Why is he the only one doing it? We actually have a really great tool that we use with our clients, which I think is probably torture for them in the moment, but afterwards it's so. Is
it a 15-minute time tracker?
It is a time tracker. It's not a 15-minute, but one of the questions we ask in there is like, was this planned or was this an interruption? Is it something only you could do? And how did it make you feel? Like there's a couple different things in there, but there's a lot to unpack here. And without knowing more, it's hard for me to say, but my gut says, he's either having a really hard time giving up control because he doesn't fully trust his team to do the work, or the team has dropped balls because they don't know actually what's expected of them. And then the other part of that is, I see in business all the time that there's a certain percentage that can be automated because it happens all the time. It's repetitive questions, it's repetitive tasks, whether it's contracts or emails or whatnot. You can't automate, set and forget 100% of your business because there's, the human touch component. But generally, it's about how can you create the necessary leverage to free you up. And so a lot of that comes in team and operations. And so I'm very intrigued, but chances are, if you look at the other practice, they're running with players versus worker bees.
Interesting. And I think I teed up that entire portion of the conversation somewhat incorrect, where it's less of a case study, because obviously I don't have all the information to actually be able to come up with a solution, and more of a, hey, what questions should this person be asking themselves? Whether in all likelihood, the problems that are present and what should they consider doing? So less of a case study, that's on me, and more of a, hey, what should this person be thinking about? Yeah. That in and of itself is very helpful to be able to ponder. And I'm sure that this isn't the only advisor out there that has these problems. So hopefully that was still helpful for, the folks listening in.
Well, there's another component that I can add. It's called the Eisenhower matrix. do, delegate, defer, and delete, the 4 Ds.
Oh, yeah, I know that.
Yeah. So a lot of times I see business owners when they're getting burned out or bogged down, it's because they're not doing the things that actually only they can do to move the business forward. Generally, it's only about 3. They're not deferring the things that are not truly urgent, which in my opinion means they have a lack of boundaries where they're available all the time, or they're just letting people email them at crazy hours and they respond, or the team knows they'll do it. So if the team doesn't do it, or if they ask questions, they know that the boss will do it, right? And then delegation, the key to delegation is understanding the definition of done and the purpose of the delegation. And then there's so much in a business that is quote unquote busy work that isn't always important to do. And if you can delete it or find a way to automate it, then it frees up so much of your day. And so if you're finding yourself getting burned out or trying to burn down your business because you are burned out, it comes back to recentering yourself about why you have your practice and where you're going. And then, sometimes it's as simple as making a list of the things that you really flock and hate in your business and figuring out how to get those off your plate, whether it's the person, whether it's just, if you really hate that networking meeting that you're going to every week and you don't see value, just stop going. Like, you don't need that. So when you can clarify the value of your time and where you get it back, and go through the Eisenhower matrix of do, delegate, defer, and delete, a lot will open up in your business.
Well, that's very helpful. I appreciate you unpacking that for me. With that being said, to transition slightly, so for those of you who are tuning in, if you've listened to episodes before, you know what's coming next. If it is your first time tuning in, one of the things that I ask all of our guests is what one of their favorite books is. And the whole purpose of that is there's so many books out there that sometimes you don't really know where to start. So the whole purpose is to really distill a reading list for you from, the folks that we have on the show. So Lauren, you chose The Power of TED by David Emerald. And I actually haven't come across that book before. So I am curious to hear why you picked it and the impact ultimately that it's had on you.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I mean, you can see my bookcase. I have hundreds of books. So this was actually really hard for me to choose. So this book was actually recommended to me several years ago. It's a very short read. Like, you could literally read it in a day. It's, 145 pages with big text. So why I love it. So it's The Power of TED, and TED stands for the empowerment dynamic. And the reason I love it is because the empowerment dynamic is essentially a triangle that has an R, a P, and a V. And the R is rescuer, the P is persecutor, and the V is victim. So, like a damsel in distress would be the victim who anxiously awaits her rescuer from the villain, who's the persecutor, by the handsome prince, which is the rescuer. So that's a very cliche example, but that's the one they give in the book.
Yeah.
And the reason I love this book is so often it's really easy to say, oh, poor me, like the economy is, in turmoil. So that's impacting my business, the supply chain, like the customer, like all the things that are happening to me. Or, this client is just being a really big pain in my butt, or it's my job to be available to my clients all the time because I'm rescuing them. And so when you're in this triangle, it's really tough to run a business or really make an impact. And so you can actually step out of the triangle once you understand this and get to a different place where you're empowered to not be cycling in this. Because if you think about this, it can translate inside business, inside personal relationships, where you're like, you could be the victim of your wife nagging you or vice versa. And so it's really fun to pop out of this awareness into something that is going to help you transition into a bigger leader. And so the empowerment dynamic, so the shift is you've got the creator role, then you've got the challenger role, and then you've got the coach role. And so I won't spoil it, but when you're able to shift out of the 3 lower energies into the 3 higher energies, for lack of a better word, it shifts your perspective on how you can interact with the world in all of your relationships.
Kind of interesting is how that act of kind of being in the problem, right? Or in that lower energy and rising above it to kind of see what's going on. Kind of connects well to your traffic example, being behind a big truck and then helicoptering up. So it's funny how you chose that book, which whether it was conscious or subconscious, it's kind of what you work with folks on, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that was not conscious, but I do love how all of my stuff works together. Yeah.
Come full circle.
Yeah.
Well, awesome, Lauren. I appreciate you joining. I think this was a very helpful episode for advisors, and a lot of folks wake up one day and realize they have a business and, spend years trying to figure it out. And hopefully this episode and all the stuff that we talked about gives them things to think about. With that being said, if they want to take it a step further beyond this episode and actually say, hey, rather than trying to figure this out on my own, I'd like some help. What's the best way to get in contact with you?
Yeah, the best way is to visit our website, goldenkeypartnership.com, and book a free strategy call with me, yours truly, because there's nothing, honestly, that I love more than getting a business owner out from reactive mode into proactive mode and bridging that gap from, oh, I have a business to, oh, I have a business that's running like a well-oiled machine.
Awesome. Well, feel free to check that out. I'm sure there's some good information and resources on the website as well that you'll benefit from. So Lauren, I appreciate you joining. But before we wrap up, for everyone listening, appreciate your time and attention as always. I know that everyone has conflicting demands. So whether you're listening to this, on the ride to or from work or during a workout or just as a way to break up the day, appreciate you thinking of us in those moments and bringing us along with you. So thank you for that. And this is an episode that's worth sharing for sure. So click that share button, share it with another advisor that you think is going through something similar to what we unpacked today that may be able to get some value from it. And if you would be so kind as to leave a review on iTunes, that would be super helpful and appreciated as well. So thank you all. And one final time, Lauren, I appreciate you joining today. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me.